setting a screen. Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen. Izzo's dying for a moving screen.
It's that dreaded moving screen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn of The Athletic, here with Dylan Burkhart, UM Hoops. It is Wednesday, July 7th. Long time no talk, buddy.
It's been a minute, I think. And when was the last time we did one of these, like NCAA tournament?
I think transfers, maybe?
Yeah, I think we did one or two, time? But you've been
a while
covering the world of golf. Do you even remember college basketball?
No, I don't. I've been late on stuff. I'm always playing catch up. What's going on? What's the scoop? I'm like 3 days behind on stuff anymore. It's hate to see it, man.
Luckily, it's July, so
true.
There's not much in the way of. It's slow. I feel like the COVID summer was busier because everyone was sitting around their computer and there was just lots going on. I feel like now everyone's out in the world, just kind of living their life and
experiencing things,
feeling
just up
the world
north,
again.
Right?
Yeah, live up north, a little lake time.
Love it.
Yeah.
I've just been going to golf tournaments and playing golf, and it's been I think this summer, I can't believe it was already the 4th of July because I felt like we were all waiting to get to a summer to be able to go like break out of our cages. And now it's like already feels like it's like half over.
But at least we're enjoying it in the meantime. And we got some.
Tigers got some juice. Go to a Tigers game.
Oh, I haven't watched I actually did go to a baseball game this year, but I can't follow baseball. Are the Tigers doing well?
I think they don't suck.
Okay, that's good.
Upgrade.
Cheers to not sucking.
It's really, but I know it's what this podcast strives for. Dylan, so this week we had kind of been leading up to these draft decisions, and it's been such a kind of wandering road, it feels like, through this because of all it's all been different dates and different rules and different this and different that, and everyone from the coaches to the players to the handlers, God bless them, to guys like you and me are still trying to get comfortable with, what happens when and when decisions are made and things like that. And so this week we came up on final withdrawal dates for the draft. And we came up, there was a portal date this week too, wasn't there?
July 1st, I believe, was the last day that you can notify your school you're leaving or entering the transfer
and be
eligible this year.
Right. Anyone can still leave, but
which blessed us with a wonderful withdrawing from the draft and entering the transfer portal.
A new wrinkle. I like that one.
It's just a new move. Like I'm here for the highest bidder. What other options do I have? And I mean, power to the people that want to. That's the new world we're in. I don't think I've ever remembered that before this year.
No.
Maybe for a mid-major, but you're seeing high major kids like Kofi Coburn in the portal out of the draft. I mean, it's very rare that you can have, I think, that strong of a season that you could experiment with the draft and see where you stand and then say, oh, well, I'm just going to go somewhere else when I come back. But
yeah, so like that, does that mean that you had like your actual school help you through the draft process and then you decide you don't want to go to the draft process, so you leave that school? Because that's a move. That's a play.
Yeah, I think agents handle a lot more of that now that they're allowed to, though, right? Because even if you're testing the waters, not like it used to be, you need your coach to kind of set that stuff up. But now you can have an agent kind of run your shop, even if you maintain eligibility. So I don't know if Brad Underwood was helping Kofi Coburn with the process or pitching him on reasons he should come back as much. So who knows? But that's the world we're in.
That is. Obviously, Michigan got a pretty monster boost with Hunter Dickinson opting to return for his second year. Certainly changes I think most people had kind of continued to project Michigan the same way with thoughts that he'd be back. But as you know, as I know, as there had been in recent weeks, kind of more and more chatter of like, hey, have you heard that like Dickinson might not actually be coming back? Like a lot of those types of phone calls and stuff like that, where, I mean, I certainly thought it was a possibility at some point. I never heard like for sure that he was gone, but lo and behold, relatively recently, kind of came to that decision to come back. The not getting a combine invite, obviously, probably crystallized things a little bit. What was kind of your read on how strongly he considered staying in the draft, and just kind of where he fell in terms of what was best, right, for him, because it's hard nowadays.
So I get all the reasons that he would want to stay in the draft. He clearly, if he was going to be drafted, I think he would be in the draft. I think it's also pretty clear that he wasn't going to be drafted. I think he's pretty clear. If you look at the combine invites, right, he's in that 80 to 120 range of prospects, and that's pretty far out from actually being picked. I mean, I think he said last night that he had 2 workouts with NBA teams. It's not like he was parading around to every, like he just wasn't quite on that radar. And I think that's fine. I think that's what everyone knew. I don't think that takes away from the fact that, yeah, if he was going to be, if someone told him, yeah, we love you at 45, he'd probably be in the draft. Like that's,
I agree.
And that's completely rational. I think there's a big difference between wanting to be drafted and like needing to leave. I think you've seen in the past guys that declare early and they don't really care what their feedback is. They're just done with college, right? So that's a different situation entirely. I don't know that was ever this situation as much as, man, I really think I can do it, and let's see what happens. And yeah, I want to do it, but at the end of the day, someone has to want you back. Like if you want to stay in the draft and actually get in the draft, someone has to want to pick you. And I don't really think his NBA stock is at that level right now from anything I can understand.
In your mind, like, I thought there might be a little bit more interest in him in this process. I was, I understand the limitations. I understand this. I understand that. But there does seem to be some pretty good like growth potential there and stuff like that. Like, I'm not saying I expected him to be, start trending toward a late first round or early second round. But like, I would have thought that he would have gotten more workouts just because teams like getting their hands on guys. I would have thought that maybe he is just a total dinosaur in terms of the NBA game, and I don't appreciate that because I don't watch enough NBA. Like, what's kind of your feel on that?
So the one thing that I do think, it's not that guys like Hunter Dickinson or Kofi Cockburn can't be useful players in the NBA as much as I think that there's not a ton of value. You can kind of find a replacement level big guy for pretty cheap, right? Like, so I think that plays into a little bit of it.
Okay.
But I also just think if you look at his freshman year, there's just so many things that he needs to improve on. And for me, it's not, everyone's going to talk about the jump shot, right? And he's going to shoot more jumpers this year, and that's going to be a huge focus. I think it will be, and I think he'll make threes. For me, it's much more about, can he actually be a legitimate scorer both ways in the post and consistently finish over the other shoulder? Because as you saw late in the year, once teams can actually scout and defend, and when you're playing against good teams, you're going to get that taken away. And in the NBA, if you can only go one direction, you're never really going to be able to be an effective post-up scorer, right? So I think I look at that, and I look at his passing. I think we've hyped up his passing for a year and a half, but he wasn't really particularly effective as a playmaker last year. He had a lot of turnover issues, and it took him a while kind of to adjust to double teams. I think if you're Hunter Dickinson, you need to say, okay, I'm going to be an actual playmaker, whether it's out of the high post, whether it's against double teams. And I think he has that ability. I don't think he's got there yet, but those are the kind of things that are pretty attainable, like things to say, yeah, you obviously need to improve in this regard. And I don't really think that he's at a level where NBA teams will just look over all that and say, well, you're 7'1", right? Like, I just don't quite see that upside. Like, if Kofi Cockburn isn't a second round pick, I think Hunter Dickinson's probably behind him a bit. Like, Kofi Cockburn improved a ton as a sophomore.
Sure.
So I think that's what you can look at and say there really is a path to get a lot better in that regard.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, if he had left And, he would be best case scenario would be a two-way, right? On a two-way, even on his G League team, he'd be the 9th, 10th man. Like, where would he be getting the reps to be improving in all of these areas? Like, I've always thought the best thing for him coming back to Michigan would be the fact that he's the guy. He is the guy. He'll get every touch. If he wants to be able to work on that right hand, they're going to let him do that in live action, right? Like, that would not be happening at the next level. So, like, where would the improvement be if he left? Like, that guy needs to play. He needs to be running up and down the court for 32 minutes a game.
And he's the kind of guy who wants to be the guy. He like
100%.
that. This is like, it really sets up like that the intrigue of coming back, having fans in the building, being this star on campus. Like, that's very much in his persona and what he wants. It's hard to pass that up, I think, when you consider all the factors and what you're looking at on the other side. As confident as you might be, and he is a confident kid, but as confident as you might be, you can't just make it be another way. Like, he's not going to get picked right now, and he's going to be probably a preseason first team All-American and one of the best players in college basketball and relish every second of it, right? So I think you look at that and you say it was a pretty black and white decision. I don't know. I feel like everyone, when they come back, wants to say how close they were to staying in the draft, but I just don't really see that he had that option, if we're being honest.
I mean, having the option and actively wanting to leave are two different things. I think there were times where he actively wanted to leave and was putting it out there that he was going. But to your point, I mean, I think this is one of the most interesting things here is, what he is in coming back, because it's not only like you do just get so excited thinking about next year, just in terms of college basketball, like not just Michigan, but like, the full arenas, there's going to be so much juice behind, like, especially early season games. Like, you think like that Michigan playing at UNC and home against Kentucky in the same week. A guy like Dickinson, I think, is coming into this year not only with the intention of being the man at Michigan, but also being the villain in the Big Ten. Like, he's one of those dudes that is going to lean into all of this, and he's going to be a character. He's going to be like one of the faces of college basketball, and that comes with major value right now. And like, I've been going back and forth with Nick about this, trying to figure out like ballpark, or like, what is the earning potential for a guy with the new setups? Like, can he make $50,000? Can he make $200,000? Can he make $500,000? Like, I have no idea. I don't think anybody really does. Like, but everything is in place for Dickinson to kind of be, in terms of college basketball, taking football out of it, right? Everything's in place for Dickinson to kind of be a barometer of like what is possible right now in terms of earning potential. And it's because, he's a proven commodity. He is a, personality, right? Mm-hmm. He is at a place like Michigan, which is one of the 5 biggest brands in college basketball. He is at a school that also has the benefit of being like in a true college town, right? Like Ann Arbor is Michigan, and the possibilities for a player like him in that setup as opposed to being in a city are totally different. So like whatever's possible right now, I feel like you could find out from Dickinson, because there's a difference between the guys who are like the big possible NBA stars having that type of value, that long-term value, versus the dude who like value right now to the college game. Does that make sense?
Yep. I think that there's definitely like more upside for local sponsorship type deals as a returning player, whether it's whatever, any sort of sophomore, junior, senior, whatever, like, because that's someone's face. Like, you can't sell something with someone's face who you haven't seen yet, right? So you can have all the best freshmen in the world, but unless they're Zion, people don't really know them until halfway through the season. At that point, your earning potential is kind of cut down. Hunter Dickinson could go. People know Hunter all over the place, so that upside is all there. I don't think we really know what that looks like and like what kind of deals we see? Is Hunter Dickinson going to come to press conferences wearing like golf polos with people's logo on it? Like, I don't know. Like, how does this even play out? I do think that there's more to making name, image, likeness work as a player than just being popular. I think it's going to take smart advisors around you, a smart brand around you, and like figuring out how to actually get all that done, in the sense that it's not just passing around a tweet on Twitter that says, hey, my DMs are open, come hit me up. Like, if you can have representation, and I assume Dickinson's representation from the draft process can probably help facilitate a lot of that. I think that's legal, right? So that's what you need. And if you,
what is legal anymore? What does that word even mean?
I don't know.
Who gives a shit?
So if you have someone who can sort of orchestrate those deals, I think you have a lot more upside. And I don't know, it'll be really fascinating to see what kind of plays out. Cause I feel like this first week or so of name, image, likeness, it's been, podcast or, cute appearance here on this or that, or like a lot of smaller stuff. Right.
Mm-hmm.
What's like, are there bigger deals out there? What does that look like? I think it's odd because no one really knows the impact for a company. Right. So how do you really price something that you've never been able to do? Right. Like, I don't know. And that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And I guess we'll probably start seeing that here over the next few months leading into the school year.
Yeah, I feel like some people were expecting there to be like guys just announcing like major contract deals like in that first week. Like, this is all unknown, right? Like, everyone's kind of wandering into this on both sides, both the people who'd be interested in signing up players. Is like, what do you pay? What is a reasonable thing to pay for any of this? And we're not going to really find out, you're right, until like people start kind of pulling the trigger on, we're signing this kid to a $25,000 whatever deal for A, B, C, and D.
Because right now there's like the sort of marketplace idea that's out there for a lot of these schools where you can just go on and buy a shout out or a podcast appearance or a quick blurb or a picture or something and use that, and you just pay directly basically through a platform. And like, that's sort of the ground level. And that's how guys who aren't national stars can probably make some money, right? But then there's the bigger idea of, if you're an all-American type of player, whether it's football, whatever, any face that people would recognize, it doesn't even have to be football or basketball, but that's when you start to think, well, okay, can you actually kind of broker a deal with a company and actually like market yourself? But I think you're gonna have to go out and do that as much as people are gonna just come find you. So I don't really know how that plays out, but that'll be interesting. Like, are we going to see shoe brands doing this? I feel like that's a slippery slope with their contracts with schools, things like that.
I don't know how certain things like that are possible.
So that's going to be what I guess we'll see, right? Like, you can't go sign a contract with Adidas if you're wearing Jordan shoes or vice versa.
Right.
So it'll be fascinating, because if you think about the ecosystem before all this happened, like, the underground money was coming from shoe companies to players and things like that. And that was most of a big part of what was going on in the basketball space. How does that refocus? Is that money put above board somehow? It'd be really interesting.
I'm about to sneeze.
And
we're back. I'll be pretty curious to see the size and scope of some of these things. And, but before we go I think we're probably going to talk more name, image, and likeness. Is UM Hoops going to sponsor a player? What do you?
We don't have plans. I'll give some affiliate deals if any players want to hawk subscriptions, though. Just my DMs are open, right? There you go.
You should just pick like a random dude, like who would be like a walk-on or something, and just have him out there just pounding the pavement on campus.
There you go.
For UM Hoops.
Done.
Maybe get one of those. What are those big spinny signs that like the dudes stand outside of, like
like a hot dog signs?
Yeah.
Yep, that's the plan. That's the new UM Hoops business model, and starting in July.
Get like Folds out there.
There you go. At the end of the bench, just swinging a sign around. It's a wrap.
It. That's potential there.
But there are like weird. I guess you were going to try to change the subject, but there are a lot of weird. Like, I think I saw the Nebraska Rivals site is sponsoring a podcast by two players. Like, I feel like there's a lot of blurred lines between media and this name image. Like,
and like, that's a weird one. Because then the school is like, well, wait a second. That's kind of our content, like, that school's communications and media office is not liking that. That's you want to talk about slippery slope. When the school loses control of its content, of its rights, things like
a lot
that.
of money for that stuff.
That's like, I saw the Michigan State guys. That was it, like the Locked On Spartans guys. They like they sponsored a couple of football players or something like that to tweet about their podcast and stuff like that. Maybe
it's a new
maybe
world.
the moving screen. We get some guys.
There you go. We got to build our brand. Can we go back to Michigan's roster for?
I was going to ask. We need to get into what Dickinson means to the actual team.
Yeah, because I think Dickinson. I mean, you can't really sugarcoat. It's much harder to think about what Michigan would have looked like without Dickinson, which is a slippery slope compared to like thinking of it as an addition, right? Because whether however serious Hunter was about saying in the draft, like, I don't think anyone ever really thought like, oh, this is what Michigan's rotation is going to look like next year without Hunter Dickinson.
Right.
So, I mean, he's an All-American that makes everyone else better. I think the other four spots on the floor are way more interesting as far as kind of how they fit together. And I don't really see, I think with Dickinson back, I think you look at this roster and say it's probably the most kind of just top to bottom depth of talent that Michigan's had since maybe like 13, when they had, I think, 5 first rounders on that team.
Sure.
I think you look at, I think I did this right in my story, but there's 5 McDonald's All-Americans in the Big Ten. 3 are on Michigan's roster, and 2 probably will come off the bench. Like, right. I just think you look at how many good players are on this team. Obviously, some aren't proven, but I like McDonald's All-Americans generally play minutes, and you're going to like good minutes at this level. And you don't see a lot of that in the Big Ten. And like, they're kind of extras if you look at how this team's going to come together. And that's what I think is an intriguing kind of as the upside of looking at this group.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Big Ten has been, in recent history, basically devoid of McDonald's All-Americans. It's been one of like the major, anytime we get into the conversation, why doesn't the Big Ten win national championships, this, that, the other thing? Well, I'm like, how many McDonald's All-Americans, how many first-round NBA draft picks? Compare those numbers to other conferences. That's the answer right there. With Michigan, though, this is it's pretty much unprecedented, like in terms of recent history of the league, to have 3 McDonald's All-Americans on a team. Forget playing time. Just the mere fact of having 3 on one team in recent history, you just haven't seen that. Basically, the last time would probably be going back to those Ohio State teams.
That's what I was going to say. That right? Indiana might have had
the Miles Bridges class. At one point, they would have had 3. The team that lost would have had, because Josh, Miles, and Jaren Jackson.
Yep. That
team had 3, separated by 2 classes. So you have that, Ohio State, and then like before that, you're going back into those 80s, 90s glory days where the league just had, like, every team had like 4 NBA players on it. But to Michigan specifically, like, I think I was having a conversation yesterday. I think this is like, you look at a guy like Moussa Diabate, like, this is major for a guy like him, because I'm sure he would like the playing time, right? All well and good, but ideally he's not a guy you'd want to just have to suddenly be like, okay, he's the guy, throw him into the deep end and watch him try to swim, right? Him coming along behind Dickinson, like the fact that Hunter Dickinson is being backed up by a guy who's a top 15 recruit in the country is insane. And, but it's a huge, it allows for that learning curve. It allows him to go out and kind of get his feet under him. He's a little bit raw, but at the same time, he's from early workouts, like super high IQ, really a fast learner, knows the game, like is curious about the game. One of those, like, he'll stop you at random times and talk hoop and stuff like that. He's kind of one of those guys who's just a high consumer. So you get a guy like that and give him room to grow. kind of give him some runway, that's the best case scenario for his long-term growth. And very few programs get that benefit opportunity ever, because now you get a guy who's that talented, you just have to play him. It's like quarterbacks in the NFL anymore, right? Like, you're in, man. Sorry.
Yeah, you look at it like this. Michigan doesn't need Moussa Diabate to be anything early in the year, but Michigan can let Moussa Diabate be whatever he is by the end of the year, whether that means he's playing 30 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. Like, you can make that work. And that's really the luxury that you have with really Diabate and Kobe Buffkin as far as how their roles potentially kind of shape up within the rotation, where it's not like, hey, we need you, like you said, go man the center position for 30 minutes, even though you're still pretty skinny and raw and you haven't like played at this level. I think Dickinson was unique in the sense that he was just so big that he was easy to pencil into that starting center role as a freshman. Now you look, Diabate, if he like fits in right away, you can play him at the 5, you can play him at the 4, you can really get anything out of him in that regard. And I think that's really the luxury that you get with the situation. And the one thing I'd say about Diabate is people I've talked to have watched him play a lot, really focus on how hard he plays as well. And he's a really high motor guy, really on both ends. I think the concern is sort of what's his go-to move on offense. I think he'll be able to do 5 or 6 different things in a highlight fashion, and you'll be like, holy shit, he can do that. But I think that there's not 1 or 2 things he can do consistently, right? You're going to make this amazing spin move into a turnaround jumper once, but I don't think you're going to make that 55% of the time or whatnot. So that's going to be the thing for him, I think, is finding his sweet spot offensively where you have the ability to do all these different things. You need to find one thing that's kind of your go-to move and beat just that guy rather than maybe do a bit of everything just within the role that Michigan would need from him. But yeah, I mean, could he have started at center and this been a good team? I think probably, and you would have got there, but I think
you could make a case Brandon Johns could start at center and this would be a pretty good team. And we haven't even mentioned him.
Yeah, that's also, I mean, it's all there. I'm really heavy. I'm assuming you were covering golf and didn't watch much of the G League Elite Camp on Twitch, but I'm fascinated by Devontae Jones. I think he's the swing factor in all of this. And I was really high on Mike Smith just being able to come in and run the team. I don't see the same. Like, what I'd say about Devontae Jones is he clearly fit in on the court at the G League Elite Camp. He could get some buckets. He could get some steals. His wingspan really stood out. I'm not sure he's completely a point guard still. And even in that setting, when he was playing point guard, I'm not sure he makes ball screen reads at the same level as maybe a Mike Smith. And I think that's, for me, the biggest question about how all these pieces fit together, because he needs to be a point guard. And I think the good thing is he went through this NBA draft process too. And I'm sure everyone said, look, man, we don't need 6'1" guys who can score 19 points a game. We need 6'1" point guards who can defend. So that aligns with what Michigan wants. But I think that's maybe like the one thing to watch as far as if there's one loose brick kind of in all of this, it's going to be a point guard that can facilitate between however many guys are going to play. It's going to be a long list. And I think that's where I need to see more from him. And maybe my biggest question about this team.
It's interesting. So what about when you went back and watched his sophomore year at Coastal, when he did play a little bit more of a traditional point guard? Now he's playing in, the Big South or whatever the hell the conference is. But when you saw his stuff from Coastal, right, from his sophomore year, did you think, okay, this projects just fine? And then watching him in G League has
I've been skeptical
paused
from the start. I mean, what they run, what Coastal runs is not what Michigan's going to run. It's very up tempo based. And it's not just sort of that half court ball screen game that is just such a big part of what Michigan does. And I can't really see him going away from it. I'm not saying he can't be that guy. It would be an impressive, you're going to give Howard Isley a raise if he comes out as like a pass first point guard who's whipping the ball first, second, third read out of ball screens. I would be impressed, especially early in the year. I think it's going to be work for him to turn into that player, I would say. And I think he probably is coming here to do that, but that's just the thing to think about with him, in my opinion.
Because he's a proven defender, right? He's
6'6" wingspan.
He's going to give you really good defensive presence. He's strong. He's big. He's got he looks like a man, right? He's got arms. So, so that kind of checks all the boxes on that end of the court. But so if we're talking offensively, then because his not being a true pass first point guard, he's also not a natural shooter.
Nope.
Either.
But
he's got a funky jump shot
and a really effective floater.
Yeah. So if he, playing in between, that's fine. If he can get those looks, because he's going to have the pieces around him and he's going to be having a 7-1, monster setting those ball screens for him. So he'll be able to get into that little middle space for that array of floaters and finishes at the rim. But that's interesting. I think so. You're saying basically for all of these pieces to reach their potential, though, your Caleb Houston's right on the wing and Dickinson being able to get the most out of this year, it's going to come into him being able to move the ball.
Yeah, I think you just go down the list. Eli Brooks, Caleb Houston, Hunter, they're all going to be better players with great point guard play. They're all pretty dependent on good point guard play, and that's sort of the X factor. And there are other, like Frankie Collins on the roster, Zeb Jackson on the roster. Like those guys could fill some of that. Eli Brooks obviously is a good ball mover. I just don't think he's a shot creator for others to this point. And I still think like Devontae Jones is ahead of Eli as sort of a handler in tight spaces and some of that stuff. But I'll be curious. And the other X factor there is Kobe Buffkin, who for me is probably my favorite player in this class. And he's so good in ball screen situations already as a young kid. It's hard to see how that really projects right away, but there's definitely upside there.
Yeah. So Dickinson, what do you think are fair projections for this year? What does a Hunter Dickinson first team All-American season look like if he fulfills, obviously what's going to be the expectations?
I mean, so he was a second team All-American last year. Is that right?
Right.
So if he plays, he played 25 minutes per game.
25 minutes per game, like 14 points, 60% shooting, 7.5 boards. I think it was a block and a half a game.
How many minutes can he play a game?
32.
32. I mean, if he can play 32 minutes a game, and if you just multiply those stats out.
A third of the year he was coming off the bench behind Austin Davis. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. And, maybe Austin decides to suit up again.
I think that he can get up into push 30% usage, and he was at 26% last year. And so I think, I don't know what that comes out to statistically, but if you just take his best games, if you take his best 8 games probably and just sort of multiply those out by a season, he would have been a first team All-American last year in a sense. So I don't think it looks that much differently. I think that it's more about, can he improve on his games in the areas that will prevent him from having maybe those off games, right? Counter move in the post, better passing. I have a hard time projecting out what that would be statistically, but I think you kind of just say, if it's a good season for Hunter Dickinson, he's going to be a first team All-American just based on how productive he was already. And the fact that you're taking 2 pros out of the rotation next to him, he's going to have a lot more touches, I would say.
Right. It's interesting that the last time we saw him was that UCLA game, which was a tale of two guys, right? I mean, the first half was brutal. Couldn't even hold on to the ball. And then second half, he had a totally dominant stretch. And then I believe in the last couple of minutes, they couldn't really get him any touches or it just obviously the game was horrific wall to wall for Michigan, but
all around.
That's kind of the taste left in the mouth for him. I think, most people probably forget the specifics of the game, but for him, that's kind of been what he's been sitting on, right, for 3 months now.
Yeah, and honestly, you could say the last month and a half of the season for him was a disappointment based on the standards he set, right? People did adjust to his game. His efficiency dropped considerably. The book was out on him. And really after that, maybe Ohio State game, he had some good moments, but I don't think he really dominated the way he was in December and January and just sort of going to work, that's what he needs to, like, that's the player that everyone expects him to be, I think, for a whole season. And that's really what stands out to me, because that's an adjustment. And he didn't prove that he could go the other direction ever to any sort of consistent level. And that's a big step. Like, I did some early kind of research of guys who were as one hand dominant in the post as him. And a lot of them never really add that other hand. So I don't think it's like,
what are some examples there?
Nick Ward, one guy that I noticed who was like one hand dominant in the post. But some they adjust, but I think it's going to be like, I think I have the math, but he was at like 90-10, right? Like he goes to one way. I don't think he's going to get to 50-50.
And that 10% were almost like accidental and like tip-ins and putbacks and stuff like that.
And his efficiency was way down whenever he would go the other way, like significantly, like top 10 percentile to his left hand, bottom 10 percentile to his right. So the numbers are really dramatic, and it stood out basically across all of college basketball. Obviously, it's really hard to get that many shots up in general and really get on, like, to qualify for those lists when you're that one hand dominant, which shows how effective he is getting to his spots. But I just don't think it's wave a magic wand and all of a sudden he's doing that, right? Like, it's the same when you look at Kofi Coburn, who says he's going to come back and be a playmaker. My man, you have 5 assists all of last season. Like, you can't just flip the switch. And that's what's going to be interesting, is can he actually do that? And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I had to bet on one of the two areas actually seeing some level of fulfillment, it would be shooting over his offhand.
Yeah, I would
he's
say
going to shoot.
He'll make double-digit threes this year or whatever. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And that will make him a harder scout, but it's not like it's new that he was one-hand dominant this year either, right? It's not like the book's been out on that. He's, I'm sure, been working on it. It just hasn't come to him naturally. So I think that's something to watch as far as, does he actually develop those counter moves inside? And that's, for me, would increase his upside more than the shot or anything else. I think that's really, because then how do you stop him, right? Like, you saw when teams couldn't stop him from getting to his favorite hand. What if he could go either way? I don't know what you do, honestly.
Well, yeah, and then you're going to get into that situation. If he can go both ways, now you just have to double team him constantly. You're going to have to, at minimum, you're going to have to dig on every touch. And now, he is an able passer, and there's going to be an array of 3-point shooters around him again. If along the perimeter is Eli Brooks, Caleb Houston, Devontae Jones, or a Kobe Buffkin, or whoever, right? That ball can start swinging and someone's going to get an open look. So, we saw that story. That's when Michigan was at its best last year. So, anything else on Dickinson? I feel like I had one more thought on him. And like many thoughts in this aging mind. I just think it's like, where would you put Michigan in the preseason rankings now that you kind of see where other things are? I mean, I think they're
settled. I think they're like a
national team,
top 10, top 5,
borderline top 5, right?
I think so. I don't know who, they have too much talent. Just when you look down the roster, it's hard to put them anywhere else. I
would put them ahead of even with Travion back at Purdue. Now that both lineups are kind of set, I've seen people been like, Michigan or Purdue is a favorite. I think I would put Michigan ahead of Purdue.
Although Jaden Ivey's been going off in the U19 World Cup over there. So I
love Jaden. I love some Jaden. That's not a knock on Purdue. It's more just what Michigan has talent-wise. And there's, this team is, for better or worse, sometimes when you're 10-11 deep, but they're 10 and 11 deep.
Yeah, I think that. Do you think this is so? Through 2 years, Juwan Howard hasn't really played his bench. His first year, the bench numbers are higher, mostly because Isaiah missed so much of the year, and it just kind of threw the numbers off. Do you think that this is a team that actually goes like 10 deep? I mean, we like last year, Michigan was when the chips were down, it was play the starters 38 minutes. I could see this team not having anyone average more than 32 minutes or 30 minutes, right? Like, I don't know who you really, I don't know. Is it actually a 10 deep? And what does that look like? It's a really fascinating dynamic, I think, of this group.
Yeah. I mean, there's like Terrence Williams has to play. you have to find minutes for him somewhere, right? And so like that also means you're chipping away at other people's time. Same thing with Brandon Johns. Like he's going to see the court, rightfully so, right? So, well, where do those minutes come from? It's going to be kind of complicated at times, I feel like. And I think other than Eli and Hunter Dickinson, right? I feel like everyone's going to kind of be in that 20-minute range, right? Give or take 5.
Yep. I really don't see. I think the trickiest part of the whole roster is you have probably 3 or 4 guys whose best position is the 4.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be hard to sort out because where do you put them, right? I
think at this point they're hoping maybe that like a Terrence Williams can give you back up at the 3.
Yeah, which helps fix some of that. And obviously,
exactly.
So you can, but at the end of the day, you have a lot of power forwards on the roster. Like Diabate, probably more comfortable at the 5, but he can play the 4. You have Caleb Houston, who can play the 3, but I think like best case scenario, he's really a 4. Terrence Williams can't really shoot it like a 3. Brandon Johns, another 4. So you have all those guys, and maybe you're the one place you lack depth is at that 3. So is that Terrence Williams backing it up? Is it Kobe Buffkin kind of sliding up and giving you a playmaker at the 3, but at 180 pounds or whatever he weighs at this point? That's sort of the weird, like kind of the weird crunch in the roster, I would say. And it's going to give you a lot of length and kind of toughness defensively, but it creates some questions offensively, in my opinion.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. There's also there's a little bit of a crunch so between your guards, you got 5 guards for 2 spots, really, right? And like, what is Zeb Jackson? Where is he, right? And a guy like Frankie Collins that we haven't really even mentioned here, right? Like, they're coming here to play. I think they would like to see the court. But Eli Brooks, Devontae Jones are obviously going to be your veteran guys and your starters, but how does that shake out behind them? Like, you're so high on Buffkin. Well, he's got to get him on the court somehow. And then what does that mean for the other 2? There's a lot going on here.
One of those guys, I think, ends up sort of on the outside looking in. I think it's hard to figure out a way to play through that any other way, but it'll be interesting. And I mean, notice you didn't put Zeb Jackson in you have to find minutes for him on the court. Like, I don't think he has that chip on his resume right now compared to someone like Terrence Williams, who I think he didn't have a great freshman year, but he showed enough that I think the coaching staff really likes him and wants to find a role for him.
He showed enough that you want to see more. Yep.
And I think that there must have been enough there to get on that level. All right. So that's a lot of Michigan. I do think it's like, are we agreeing that Michigan and Purdue are the top 2 based on how the rosters have kind of settled here?
That's fair. And then I think that there's kind of a clear dividing line, right, between those 2 and the pack that comes next. Maryland, Ohio State, Michigan State, I would kind of say are in that next tier, followed by your next pack of Indiana, of Wisconsin, Rutgers, where you're just like, I have no idea what to make of any of them.
I'm not writing off Illinois, especially
if they get Kofi back.
If they get Kofi back, or if they get Dawson Garcia from Marquette.
Okay.
Frazier, Curbelo, Plummer.
I like their backcourt. DeMonte Williams is back. Yep.
There is enough there that if they get one of those 2 bigs, I think that's closer to that Michigan State, Ohio State, Maryland tier than the next group, in my opinion. I don't know what the situation is with Kofi, but it seems to take a twist and a turn every week when Andrew Slater tweets something new about that. So that is
like
just
I had Illinois 6th in my, like, I did a little power ranking thing 2 weeks ago, and like with Kofi on the team, I had them at 6.
I mean, Curbelo could be the best point guard in the Big Ten.
Right.
That's a good start. Kofi could be the second best big.
Now that I look at this, I had them 6 without Cobra.
Oh, so, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
So if they get one of those bigs, I think they move up. let's touch on Michigan State a bit, just because that's half the podcast, and practice is underway in East Lansing. I think this team is kind of being slept on just when I look across how other rosters in the league stack up. I'm not completely convinced about a lot of the teams that I see some people picking over Michigan State. So I also just think it's one of those situations where a stable program that has a bad year is more likely to overcorrect positive, in my opinion. And I like the influx of talent here. I just think that this all kind of fits together in a bounce back spot. What do you make of kind of early signs from East Lansing and how this team might set up?
Yeah, I mean, I want to see the fact that they finally that they have an off season of work is enormous. Like that does, and it's been like one of cohesion where like this roster's been set basically since Tyson Walker committed, right?
Which feels like ages ago.
Exactly. Other places, you don't know what the hell's going on, right? There's bodies coming, going, there's question marks. Like Michigan State has been pretty locked in on this for 2.5 months, which not many programs can say. And so when you add that combined with what Michigan State has proven in its history under Izzo of improvements in off seasons, that's a pretty good combination, especially with the guys that they have coming back and the dynamics of bad taste in the mouth from last year. Like this roster has a shit ton to prove individually and as a team. Like you can go right down the line on every single guy, Gabe Brown to Marcus Bingham to Malik Hall to Joey Hauser to Tyson Walker, right? They all have things to prove because they've kind of just never really established anything. None of them have. Right? So some way, somehow, everyone has to kind of come together and make this, I think, a version of Michigan State that we're used to.
Yeah. And if you look down, like it's a talented roster, even if maybe the talent, like if you're saying they haven't established themselves, they haven't maybe lived up to the talent across the roster, but there's a lot of talented pieces on this roster, especially and I just think if they can get better point guard play, that a lot of guys can fall into place. It's kind of like what I said with Michigan, where the key to all these other pieces looking good is reliable point guard play. And if that just wasn't ever there last year for Michigan State, and I think without that, you're just sort of limited in what you can really get from anyone. And it's easy to say, oh, it just doesn't work for Joey Hauser in the Big Ten because he had a bad year. But he might look completely different. Like we said, if he was on the Cassius Winston team, all of a sudden he would have been just putting up points left and right and just would have been the guy everyone's talking about. He just was in the wrong situation. And the easiest way to improve isn't just getting better. It's just being in a better situation. And I think it's easy to miss that. And so many guys on this team could be in a better situation next year. And then say, oh, well, this is what I came here to do. This is much more my role. It fits. And I think I see that really 1 through 4 across the roster. And then I just come back to center and I get nervous about how it's going to work out. And that's where I keep coming back to when I want to pick Michigan State higher and higher in the Big Ten.
This Michigan State team to me is like the quintessential offseason team that I can look at it and I can talk myself into being like, shit, man, this could be like a sneaky top 15 team in the country that like is borderline, contender for the last weekend or can find its way into the Big Ten title conversation. I can also look at this roster and talk myself into like, man, the middle of the pack, they might be fighting for a bid. Like everything can go a different way. Now you can say that about like every team, obviously, but like this isn't especially the case type of situation. Like if you want to tell me right now that Gabe is going to like put it all together and be a guy, right? I can buy that. If you tell me that it's just the same old, it's an exact replica of last year, I can buy that as well. If you tell me Tyson Walker is going to translate, I'll buy it. If you tell me he won't, I'll also buy it. Right down the line. One of the things that really fascinates me though when I look at it is you said overlooked. Like, two guys on this roster that kind of give me that vibe a little bit are the two non-Max Christie freshmen. And that, like, if Jaden Akins is just kind of comes out of nowhere and is very legit, right? Maybe kind of got overlooked because of the way his senior year in high school went. Like, that's a high possibility. Pierre Brooks, like, there are some people out there that love Pierre Brooks's game and think that he can probably do more than he's being thought of. So that's all interesting. And then I've given my thoughts on the potential I see in a guy like Malik Hall. But it's kind of a lot of every sentence that we've said has been if.
Yeah, because there's very few like, you're not returning many guys who have gone and played 30 minutes a night in the Big Ten, and you know what you're getting. It's all
best individual season that anyone on this roster has had, except for Tyson Walker, is Hauser's freshman year at Marquette.
Yeah, and the best. I would love to go through and look the most minutes in Big Ten per season anyone on this team has played. It's got to be under 25, right? I mean, how many minutes a game did Hauser play last year?
So I looked up a couple numbers earlier this summer. I had it as, like, career double-figure games. The roster comes to 64. Yeah. Career games of 15 points or more, 19 total. Hauser's had 11 games of 15 points or more. Gabe Brown's had 5. Malik Hall's had 3. That's it. Career games of 20 points or more, 4. Career starts on the entire roster, 124.
Huh. The one thing I'll say, like, Jaden Akins, he might be overlooked, but he's a top 50 recruit. Like, I think it's pretty fair to put fairly significant. I really like his game. I think he's going to be a contributor for this team, and I think he's going to be a big part of why they overachieve if they overachieve. Like, I would bet on him above a lot of other guys on the roster, whether they're returning or anything else, to really kind of overachieve in maybe what the baseline expectations are. I think he fits kind of nicely with what the roster needs. Like, you kind of need a secondary playmaker. That's exactly what he can give you. You need an athletic defender. That's exactly what he can give you. I like that a lot for the fit. It's just what you keep coming back to is you got to see everyone do it. And it's so funny because we're in this weird situation of so much roster turnover everywhere. And, like, all these teams have half dozen transfers coming in and, like, all new pieces. Michigan State only has one transfer coming in, but still kind of has this weird unproven roster. And I think the good thing is a lot of other teams are going to be in a similar boat, no matter where their players are coming from, the portal or freshmen or whatever. So I don't think it's not 10 years ago when you need 5 seniors to really compete and win. I think you can mix and match pieces, and people forget, like, you're only as good as the role you're in, and people are going to play minutes and people are going to score points, and they'll all kind of come together. It's not like this team's just going to get played off the court, right? If you don't know what a lot of these guys look like as 30 plus minute a game players because they haven't done it, it doesn't mean you won't like what they look like, right? Like, I don't think it's a bad thing to just have some of that turnover, especially because some of the people who were blocking guys like Marcus Bingham from playing minutes, like big minutes, weren't really that effective or great, right? I just think it's a help. I'm not sure there's anyone on this roster who I would be like, it'd be a problem if he's playing too much. Does that make sense? Sure. I don't think you have anyone that's a clear negative. Like, the best players will play. There's a lot of, it's very flat, right? That is not a
sentence we would have said at this time last year either.
No, we didn't, like, and that was what happened for a lot of the year. And I think it hurt some people's development in that scope that would have been better off just playing. And everyone's going to get a chance. Like, I don't think there's lineup spots are going to be up for grabs. It's going to be very sort of up in the air to start. And I think the best players will play without really any sort of I don't know. I don't see where it goes off track, I guess, if that makes sense.
I think you make a really interesting point about the dynamics of Michigan State's roster comparatively to the rest of the league, and like the amount of, because it had turnover, right? It they lost 3 of their top 4 scorers. They lost 57% of its scoring in Big Ten play is gone. And yet it's not an influx of transfers and new guys. And, there's a handful of freshmen and one transfer, but by college basketball standards right now, that's like old school, right? So a lot of these guys taking a step forward, but it's been the same question with so many of these your older guys. And like for a program that's been built on juniors and seniors, right, who might not be NBA guys, finding their footing and being really good upperclassmen. Well, okay. The upperclassmen are there. Who's going to do it? Like, who's going to turn into that Michigan State senior that have been kind of cornerstones on great teams in the past?
I think this ends up being much more like the 17 team that was very freshman based, right? Like not maybe, I don't know how good they are, but like you're going to have freshmen playing big roles on this team. I think Jaden Akins is going to be a dude. I'm betting in on Jaden Akins. Max Christie is going to play. Like those guys, I think can compete for all Big Ten freshman team pretty easily, I would say. So I think that's rather than searching for a junior or senior, like, I don't know. I don't see Gabe Brown being the dude who's just going to be an all Big Ten guy suddenly as a senior and hold everything together. That's just not who he is. I'm not same like Brandon Johns. He's not that guy.
I agree, but he's still going to play a lot.
Yeah.
Even upperclassmen who Izzo doesn't trust, he still plays them over freshmen. I'm not saying what should happen. I'm saying what is most likely to happen. Like he's still going to lean on his older guys. It's the way it is, right? I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I think Akins and Christie, Brooks to an extent, they definitely can have an impact on this team's ceiling. I'm just curious to see how much they get thrown in, because there are older options.
Put it this way. If Akins is starting in March, Michigan State will be a way better team than if he's not.
I would agree. And I think he plays alongside Tyson Walker. Yeah. Yeah,
that should be, if best case scenario, I think by the end of the year you're starting Walker, Akins, Christie. And that's your kind of 1 2, that's your 1 2 3. I think that means that those guys are as advertised, and I think they have the highest ceiling maybe of anyone that would be in that mix. Just my opinion. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what you got to shoot for. I'm still just a little surprised that Michigan State hasn't been more aggressive with open scholarships based on kind of the landscape of college basketball. And like, there are dudes out there. And
I mean, why they're the second this Kofi Coburn into the transfer portal came up, why it wasn't immediately, hey, what about Michigan State? Am I crazy? Why is there not smoke there?
I mean, the smoke, the obvious smoke.
Well, it's Kentucky.
That connection to Kentucky, right? Sure. And I also wonder how schools are pitching name, image, likeness packages right now, and what those rules look like. If you're going to Kentucky, what are they presenting you with as far as
Cal
what you're looking at versus what you're seeing at maybe other schools that have been maybe dipping their toes in? And it'll be really interesting how that affects recruiting transfers, recruiting high school players. And that's because that's going to change. And I'm going to go ahead and venture a guess that Cal's name, image, likeness presentation is pretty impressive and will leave you wanting to sign up right now. And I don't know if that's the case everywhere. And it'll be really interesting how all that plays out, because if you're going to go to a school where they're like, we'll set all this up for you, you're going to they throw a number out there. It's a lot easier to sign with, we'll help you and coach you along for the best, smartest opportunities for you and help you pay your taxes. Like that's a very different pitch in the recruiting room. So that's going to kind of be something to watch, I think, as the summer plays out.
Yeah, I've been told that Cal and Kentucky we're rip roaring ready to go, and I'm leaning very hard into all of this. But yeah, and I'm not saying Kofi Coburn would go to Michigan State. I was more making the point of like Michigan State still needs a 5. They could really use a really good 5, and that's been the case all summer. And I get wanting to see what Bingham, Marble, Sissoko give you, but I've drawn this comparison like 10 times. It just, to me, it feels like the way the point guard spot was handled last year, where you had this collection of bodies and you hope it works out. And instead, 6 weeks into the season, it's what the hell do we do about this position, right? So I just get that vibe that 6 weeks into the season, if we're sitting here talking about like the revolving door at the 5, a different guy starting every 3 games, like this is what we point to, right? Why didn't they get a proven commodity in the offseason? Because at the end of the day, it is Michigan State. And look, you don't just wave a magic wand and get whoever you want, right? Like you need someone who also looks at the roster and says, I'm going to come in and beat those 3 guys and be the starter, as opposed to someone who says, I just want to go to a place that has a wide open job at the 5, right? Those are 2 different things. But for a program like Michigan State that uses its bigs, that has recent examples, recent film of post touches for Nick Ward, ball screens actions for Xavier Tillman, right? Like they have all these examples of you come here, you're the primary guy, you can be all league, you can go pursue your pro fortunes. It just is it's a glaringly obvious. I've thought that this would be a very advantageous landing spot for a big on the move, and it seems like there's just never been any smoke with anybody other than the kid from Penn State, Harar or whatever the hell.
Yeah, and it would have to be, I think, a starter caliber big, right? Like you don't want another Galen Smith type of guy who Maryland added last year. You need a guy who can actually start, because you're not short on bodies. You're short on like a reliable starter caliber player, right? You need someone who can legitimately give you 25 minutes a game and has proven that he's good enough to win the job, which isn't easy to find, right? I do think everyone's like, oh, you can just go get a big in the portal. It's not that easy, but I haven't even really seen Michigan State linked with anyone or like preliminary interest sort of thing. So it seems to be a conscious decision, and I just can't completely. It seems like it's worth shooting your shot, especially because like nothing we saw last year, there was nothing to think that, oh, Michigan State loves so-and-so's game, when really none of those bigs could get over like 15 minutes in any game at any different point in the season. So that's the hard part. I mean, but there are bodies, like you say, like there's enough guys to give you 40 minutes a game. I just think you really have to hope that one of those guys can prove that he's worth 25 minutes and the rest can share the 15 versus like 12. Again, that kind of
with the variable of the conversation still going on there of Hauser giving you some minutes at the 5. No matter, I don't know how it will work out, but that's definitely in the conversation there.
Well, if that's the plan and you're just going to go all in on that, I actually like that plan. So
I know, of course you.
I'm in on that. So like that. That could be. I'm
surprised you're not like, hey, stick Malik Hall at the 5, really stretch it out. Go as small as humanly possible.
I'd rather Malik Hall play the 5 than the 3, but I think that there's just play 4 shooters.
Drive-by shooting right there.
But can you really see Izzo going all in on like the 4 shooters around Hauser? Look, like that's just not what Mitch. Like if this was a Beeline roster, we'd say that's obvious what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But that could be a really good team. And from what we saw last year, and maybe Hauser was. Like he was clearly banged up, I think, but
yes,
I think there's a better chance that he's a really good 5 than a really good 4. I saw someone tweeting about this recently. I don't know. It was like a high school thing, but the stretch 4 isn't really a thing anymore as much as the stretch 5, right? Like stretch 4s are kind of played out. It's just wings play the 4 now, and you have to be able to do all these different things. You don't really change the game if you're a big who can shoot as a 4, but you do change the game as a big who can shoot as a 5, right? because most people in the Big Ten are playing a 6'7" guy, like a Malik Hall type of guy is basically your standard Big Ten forward at the 4. And there will be teams like Michigan probably will play 2 bigs and things like that. But for the most part, you can win in college basketball with a really good, tough 6'7" guy playing the 4, and you spread the floor. He can do a little playmaking. That guy can guard a 6'10" shooter pretty easily. And that's really the drawback of if you're just a big who can shoot as a 4, it's just not quite the impact that maybe it used to be.
Marcus Bingham thinks he can shoot. Does that count? Marcus
Bingham was put on shooting probation last year.
I don't know how much Dickinson and Diabate are going to play together. You said Michigan's going to play 2 bigs. I'll be curious.
I mean, Brandon Johns is the same thing.
That's fair. Okay.
Right? I
just assumed that you meant Diabate. No, that's fair.
Yeah, well, I think both of those guys. I think that there's a chance that Michigan does not play. Like Caleb Houston is the Isaiah Livers replacement, and he's likely to play down a spot in the lineup. So that's just kind of fun. Like I would say Michigan played 2 bigs in the NCAA tournament all last year. Like Brandon Johns isn't really a shooter. He's much more of a stretch 4 than a big wing, in my opinion.
I would agree. I think that makes sense. What else do you got? Yeah, anything?
Let's see. Any other Michigan State thoughts?
I will say, like, I want to make one more point on the name, image, and likeness thing is like both of these places in terms of brand, in terms of ability to like capitalize on this thing, when it comes to college basketball, like these 2 places are really well positioned. If they're out, and we don't know the inner workings of what's going on in offices, right? And what the paperwork that's looking like that's being presented to guys and what plans are being presented and how much you're leaning into this, leaning into that, opening certain doors. But like, just in terms of, you'd be hard pressed to find, 2 programs that are as equipped in terms of recognition, brand potential, followings, things like that, than these 2. I think that they're clearly 2 of the top 10 programs in the country that can make the best of this situation, whereas other places are trying to be like, how can we compete with the best or the places that can do the best? These 2 are in that other spot. They're at the top, and what they make of it is up to them. And it'll be fascinating to see the next 3 to 5 years for both of these programs in terms of what they are able to exploit in this situation.
Yeah, I would say that just in terms of natural, like baked in advantages to start with.
Exactly.
I think they're both there. I think there's programs that you see just like across the Big Ten. I've seen kind of Purdue and Nebraska as 2 teams that have been kind of going above and beyond to puff their chest out and say they're going to do more with less, in a sense.
Sure.
And I wonder how much Michigan and Michigan State institutionally will do to take advantage of kind of the baked in advantage, right? It's one thing to have it, but it's another thing to weaponize it and really turn it into something. And that'll be the big question and how that really plays out. Like if you think just over the last few seasons, I would say if you tried to go through the Big Ten and say who could have made the most from name, image, likeness, it probably would have been a lot of guys playing at Michigan State, right? Like Cassius Winston would have been like the perfect name, image, likeness 4-year. He could have made a killing, right?
Miles sophomore year.
Miles Bridges coming back, right? Like that kind of thing really fits into like what would really work. And I think Michigan State, maybe like Michigan has the huge national brand. And if you look through like the TV ratings and everything, but Michigan State, just from a pure basketball standpoint and kind of the marketability of the program, of Izzo, like all that stuff kind of comes together into what could be a really intriguing package. So I think they do have those opportunities. I think what we have to see is what they do to leverage them. Because I think from what we know about, I can speak more about Michigan, but I don't think that it's necessarily an athletic department that's just going to be wired to maybe push the envelope, so to speak.
And that's always going to kind of be the knock on Michigan, is that kind of traditionalist approach to everything. How much are they going to be? Yeah, we will nod approvingly at you, doing whatever you want to take advantage of this young man, versus like, we are going to equip, this place to be a rocket ship for these kids that will open every possible door and try to shake all the money trees. Right. That goes against basically every reputation, every preconceived notion, culture wise of what Michigan athletics is. And like the interesting juxtaposition there, of course, is that's the rep and that's how they like to present themselves at Michigan. The basketball program, meanwhile, is led by a former member of the Fab Five, who is basically like the hottest thing in college basketball. One of the two or three, right? The combination of Juwan Howard as a person and the Michigan brand right now is about as in vogue as you could want. And you add that with this combination of this new era and name, image, and likeness and stuff that is just driven by branding. Well, shit, man. I mean, like, they are in just prime position. So which of those two dynamics, like, how do those two play off each other? I have no idea, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think the benefit for Michigan is Juwan Howard's a coach who's probably pretty well equipped to deal with sort of what goes into all that, as far as, like, you have a lot of coaches who are like throwing their arms up like, how am I going to coach if dudes are getting paid? And Juwan's been around the NBA, right? Like he can deal with what that all means and how to balance that in a way that some of the way, like, other programs, like, I don't even know, but like, you see coaches like Coach K and Roy retiring and like mentioning that as a factor, or that being reported as a factor. Like, I don't think that's really going to be the same sort of issue for Juwan, right? Like, that's just kind of fits into the sort of situations he's dealt with as a coach at the next level, and probably is easier to deal with than someone who's never had to deal with that.
Right.
And the kind of the relationship of how to deal with players being their own brands is like a new thing, and how that fits together on a team, like, could be a unique challenge to handle in certain situations. And it'll be really interesting just what that looks like across college basketball, I think. And I don't know, it'd be fascinating.
Because I think it's Izzo. I cut off your last point.
No, you're good.
With Izzo, like, one thing that, he's got the reputation as the old school guy, the stodgy. He certainly and privately he'll complain about changes of this and changes of that and blah 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 blah. But at the end of the day, that dude has adapted for a quarter century to massive changes, right? To going up against the one and done era, and he did it kind of his own way, right? Like, was always kind of living in a coexistence with your K's, your Caliparis, your Selfs, your Roys, right? While doing things kind of as a little bit of an outlier. And he found his way, and he navigated through it and put together whatever the hell it's been, 9 Final Fours, right? 8 or 9. The fact that it's a question means it's a lot of Final Fours, right? So he's been able to do this, and now for him not to walk, for him not to kind of bail right now like those other guys did, is notable. Look, Boeheim would have done the same thing as the other guys if his kid wasn't on the team. And the second Buddy Boeheim plays his last minute, Jim Boeheim is out the door, and he probably won't even have an exit press conference. He's just going to be gone. He's going to get into his car, and it's just going to be a cloud of smoke. And Izzo, meanwhile, is like, it seems like he's just like, no, I'm pushing through this thing, and we'll figure it out as we go. So I think he knows that he doesn't just get to do things the old way, that it's going to be different, but he's going to try to find a way to, I don't know, combine his way versus the new way, and I have no idea how that's going to go, but he's still there, and his contemporaries are not.
I also think like Izzo and Michigan State basketball over the last 2 decades have probably marketed themselves as a program as well as like anyone, right? And I think that the power of that like can play into marketing your players, and like you've built this, like I think Izzo's a brand, like Izzo knows how to leverage his brand. Like I think that can play into what can make that work. And I think that that's probably a benefit of what Michigan State is as a program, where that's really well established. Like I think that is definitely a benefit in that regard. And it'll be just, I don't know what this looks like, but it's going to be fascinating. Yeah. I don't know. I don't completely buy that like all these coaches are just hanging it up because of name, image, likeness, or whatever else. But I don't know. Transferring. Yeah. And we'll see. It's going to be, I don't see Izzo slowing down at all. My man is still cruising along.
Yeah. But we'll see. There could also be one season where 3 guys transfer out in the middle of the year, right? Like it's just mayhem. And then it's, wash my hands. I'm not doing this shit anymore. I'm going to sit on my pile of money and go be Tom Izzo for the rest of my life.
Yeah. But in spite of everything, like there are all these other programs around the Big Ten, not very stable, right? Illinois coaching staff, whatever's going on at Wisconsin. Michigan State, through it all, has been very stable, right? A couple transfers out this year, but I don't think that's like really a bad thing. And they're just like, it's still as stable as any program in the league by a long shot, I would say. So, right. Despite all the instability across college hoops.
And if anything, losing Dane Fife makes you more stable, at least mentally.
There you go.
Find out if Dane listens to a 90-minute podcast in July with that comment. All right, let's put a pin in it there. Dylan, this was delightful as always, my man.
That's good stuff. Nice to be back recording a podcast for the first time in 2 months.
Question. Are we going to record a live pod at your wedding?
We are not.
Can I just by myself record a live pod? Maybe set it up at one of the tables, invite people over.
You'll have to buy name, image, likeness rights to live stream from the reception there. You can reach out to my agent about billing details.
Okay, send that information along. I plan on pursuing this. So, well, I can't wait for next month, buddy. We'll record one before that, or 2 or 3 maybe.
Don't overpromise now.
All right. We appreciate everyone listening. Be sure to subscribe to The Athletic. Be sure to subscribe to UM Hoops. If you'd be kind to leave us a review in the iTunes store, we always like that. We appreciate the support. And be sure to get out there and tip your bartenders and servers.